Hello everyone, this is Sue coming to you live today from Scottsdale, Arizona. Look, I'm in short sleeves. Oh my God. Left the 5 or 6 foot of snow in the backyard and came out here to Arizona. We were at Tucson Medical Center yesterday doing work with our nursing leaders, and today we're doing, this afternoon, our C-suite retreat on extreme ownership with a group of senior leaders in healthcare, and we'll do that today and tomorrow. So glad to be broadcasting live today from this beautiful sunny place. I know some of you that are joining us are also in sunny places, but I do know that we have a big Midwestern following. So you guys just maybe live vicariously through me in this moment and take in some of the sunshine through this small little screen. So let me know if you're here. Put a comment in the comments there. Love being with you. Hello there, David. You're always here. Thank you, thank you. Oh, and Natalie. Hi, Natalie. So great, great. So welcome. So today's topic is common sense, not commonly practiced. Oh my goodness. And really, you know, the point about this topic, it's not so much about the common sense part as much as the commonly practiced that I really want to focus on today. But, you know, really in our framework, the framework for achieving great results, a lot of the things that are the solutions that we put in the hands of employees and the solutions that we put in the hands of leaders to transform their organization to a high-performing, results-oriented, high-achieving organization, they're pretty darn common sense kind of things. In fact, sometimes, you know, I have to pinch myself and say, can the solutions really be this easy? So common sense. Maybe it's something like hallway etiquette and high in the hallway, which is a positive communication standard. This is just common sense stuff. I can't believe we have to put these solutions that are so common sense in the hands of employees and leaders. Or maybe it's something like recognition and celebration. Is it not just common sense that in an organization, this is an important, you know, tactic, is to celebrate and show appreciation and recognize people? It seems like it's such common sense. Maybe it's listening, telephone etiquette. You know, the list goes on and on. If we pull out all of the solutions in the framework, even some of the clinical things, let's say it's evidence-based practice in nursing and it's purposeful hourly rounding with patients or bedside shift report, to me, in a sense, a lot of those things are pretty darn common sense kind of tactics. Yet, you know, the reason it's so important that we package them into the framework is, one, that we know that if they're commonly practiced, consistently commonly practiced, every patient, every encounter, every time, that the result of that is amazing, right? That it's amazing. So it's not as much about the magic of the solutions as it is about the magic that happens when there's common practice. Okay, so that common practice really is about hi Teresa, see you joined us too. Sorry about that. So the real reason about this whole common practice thing, or the challenge, I guess, and its importance, is that certainly there's a lot of variation in how people behave and perform, right? So some people are at the very lowest end of how they behave and perform when they show up for work each day, and some are your rock stars where, you know, they're just acting on common sense every single day and bringing it every day consistently, and a lot of it is truly just common sense kind of things, yet they're commonly practicing it, and I think that is what makes them stand out at that higher end. But that variation in how people behave and perform, and that variation really is, I think, about the consistency, the commonly practiced part of it. So maybe you have an employee that once in a while is friendly in the hallway, right? But then you have that employee that's always friendly in the hallway. Or you have that leader that's, you know, always working to develop good relationships. Or that you have this other leader who once in a while puts a little energy and effort into that. It seems common sense, right, that a leader should do that. It seems common sense that an employee should do that. But there's this variation that some do, some don't, some do it sometimes, some do it always. So this variation is really the killer of greatness. and this lack of common practice. And then the other thing about it isn't just this variation and this consistency, it's about the synergy of the common practice. So let's say we all commit to the same practices. So maybe this person is consistent with this practice and this person is consistent with this practice, and you say, wow, that's great, that consistency should get great results. But what if they were consistent with the exact same practice? Like how they build relationships with their employees, how they celebrated, how they showed appreciation, how they treated each other in the hallway, how they answered the telephone. What if everybody had a standard for that? And so not only was it commonly practiced, but it was consistently and commonly practiced that we do the same thing, right? So when you have that kind of common practice and that consistency that everyone follows that same common practice, then you get synergy. Right? You get synergy. You get this unbelievable 1 + 1 = 50 versus, 1 + 1 = 2. So when that common practice is standardized. So variation is kind of the killer of greatness. And we don't need like tricky, overly complicated solutions to get to greatness. We need to have common practice that's defined and that we're all following in the same manner. So, but part of the problem with that certainly is, again, we have this variation in how people behave and perform, and to get them to that common practice, to adopting that common practice, is requires behavior change, right? So they need to create new habits. A habit is kind of a definition of a common practice, is that now it's a habit, and that we all adopt the same habit. So that requires behavior change, and oh my goodness, behavior change is the hardest of all, right? So behavior change is really difficult. It's difficult in individuals, but then it's it's difficult in groups. So, if you think that changing your own behavior is hard, try changing the behavior of hundreds of people. Oh my goodness, that becomes the true challenge to greatness, is developing that common practice, that consistency, that habit, changing that behavior in all. So this is tough stuff, folks. So, as much as we love our framework, and we do, and we think it is a fabulous collection of solutions, of creating great strategies, creating alignment to those strategies, creating ownership for those strategies, is that it's not as much about the solutions as it is about the common practice of them, and all of these aspects of championing this change, this behavior change, and not just one, but everyone. And some of I have this boyfriend, his name is Everett Rogers. I don't even know what he looks like, come to think of it, but he's this, really smart guy who published stuff way back in the 1960s that still holds true today about how people innovate and adopt new innovation or change or create new habits. And adoption is us deciding to make it ours, and that we're going to have the new habit. But diffusion is a group phenomenon where the entire organization or large group adopts the same habit or innovates in the same way. And that there's this normal pattern of how people go through this process, or groups. Some people are the innovators of these changes, some people are the early adopters, but even there, that's usually less than 20% of your workforce. So now we still have variation. And so we have to keep going after these habits and changing these habits over a long period of time. So these kind of things don't happen quickly. And so when we work with our partners, one of the tactics that we use with them is, whether it's the employee teams that are putting solutions in the hands of the employees, so creating these new habits or standards in the employees of this is how we do it around here, or it's the leaders that this is how we lead around here, and we're creating these new leadership habits or common practices in leadership, which again are common sense, is that when we're doing this, it's a long-term commitment and process. There is no pixie dust that says that just because we want this to decrease this variation, get to this consistency and this common practice, even if we define it well, we commit to it, we're all motivated, it's going to take some time. It's going to take a good amount of time to make that happen, just because of normal humanness, and that behavior change is hard. It's hard for individuals, and then when we're trying to do it across a group, then it's even harder. But there are some clear tactics that make that work. So one of those tactics that I wanted to share to you is just really about kind of a simple change process. You know, we like to talk about plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, adjust. It's just a simple 4-step change process. We didn't invent it. Lots of people use it. It's a simple way to just organize the work of a change process. So first you have to plan, you know, specifically what changes it is that you want to make. And so when it comes to things like common practice or these solutions for employees or leaders, one of the things about that is, you know, in that planning, you first have to set the standard for it or define it. So it's in this stage that we have our partners create behavior standards of, you know, what is common practice that we want to have for how we behave at work. Maybe it's about, you know, how we commit to each other as employees, that we actually have to define that in the planning phase of, you know, what do we commit to? What do we want the standard to be? So then we can work on making it common practice. If you don't define it well in the beginning, then it's hard to make it common practice. And this is where that variation comes in, is if the organization doesn't define it overall, that this is how we're going to behave around here, this is going to be our high standard. Yes, it's common sense, but we're going to make it common practice, but first we're going to define it. If you don't do that, what can happen is, if I'm a leader in OB, I might kind of set standards for how I think my people should behave at work. And then if you're the leader in billing, you might just set your standard for how people should behave at work. So now we've got silos and lack of variation, and we actually have variation because maybe my standards are higher than your standards. And now we have variation of what you accept versus what I'll accept for how people behave at work. So having that organization clear standard allows for, again, more synergistic response. In the absence of that, I would say that if your organization isn't committed to creating standards for this, sure, do it in your own department. My God, start somewhere. You know, set that standard. How should we behave at work? It might be as simple as, you know, things common sense, like be on time for work and be ready to start at the start of your shift. I mean, that's common sense practice in the work world. But if it's not clearly stated as this is what we expect as a commitment to our coworkers, and that there's, you know, impact or consequences if people don't show up for work on time, that you can't relieve the prior shift, that it you know, impedes with coworker relationships, and on and on and on. So, you know, setting a standard for how we behave at work, our commitment to our coworkers, our commitment to our customers, maybe it's positive communication standards, maybe it's standards for actual job task performance. As soon as you can be as clear as possible on those standards, then you can start really working on making those common sense, common practices that you've defined, you can make them, you know, come alive. And that's kind of what we call bringing standards alive, is really making them common practice and creating this behavior change. So the first step in planning is to really plan, what is it that we want to standardize? What is that standard behavior? What is that standard work? And then the work after that, after you declare and set that standard, is to keep it top of mind. So in our partner organizations, when they use employee-driven teams, or the steering team is doing this for the leadership standards, is that we have them obviously through training and campaigns or introduction of the standard, and focus on the standard, maybe introducing it as a standard for the first time, that there's an importance to that. But then, you know, because this change process and this diffusion curve that Everett Rogers, my boyfriend, speaks about, is that it can't be one and done. I mean, you can't just mention the standard once and expect that all of a sudden everybody's gonna make this common practice. It's not going to happen. It's just not. Our humanness does not allow that. So we have to circle back to it over and over and over again. So we have to keep going back to it to keep it top of mind. And oftentimes when we're doing that, we're not talking about training, retraining, training, retraining. I mean, often these things, because they're common sense, we don't need to do a lot of training on how to do it. You know, think of the standard of hallway etiquette or just being friendly and hi in the hallway, that every person who passes in the hallway is going to make eye contact and a friendly greeting. Even if it's the 50th time they've seen that employee in the hallway that day, they're still going to do it. It's common practice. It's consistently practiced, and it elevates this feeling of friendliness and welcomeness in our building. So if we are going to make that common practice, we don't have to do a lot of training on that, right? But we do have to make it top of mind and keep bringing it back over and over again and circling back to it over and over again if we want to get it from 50% of the employees to 75% of the employees to 100% of the employees doing that. So we do need to keep it top of mind, and that's usually the work of these teams that are in place in our partner organizations. As these employees these teams own keeping it alive. So they might own the initial training and education and commitment to the standard and the development of it, but then they own long-term keeping it alive. And again, that doesn't require training, but what I think it does require, if you're going to do anything, maybe circle back to it at least once or twice a year, is remind people why. Why do we need to say hi in the hallway? Why do we need to have this standard? What are we trying to achieve by it? What are we achieving by it? So sometimes it's really just about bringing that forward to the workforce, and more people who maybe weren't doing it will start to do it because they understand why it's important. They're seeing evidence that it's making a difference. And so keeping it top of mind, keeping it alive long term, making sure that standard really comes to life, needs to be owned by somebody. It's not just going to happen. So setting the standard, bringing the standard out the first time, committing to the standard, and then somebody owns circling back to it often to keep it alive and top of mind. There's a leadership aspect in this as well. You know, I just talked about the employee-driven teams, and they can own this circling back and circling back. But I think that, you know, really the leadership role in this, and we call this grab the baton, is that these employee-driven teams can bring out so many of these common sense solutions that transform the work culture to a high-performing work culture, a great place to work, a great place, you know, for patients to come and receive their care. And so many of those solutions can be rolled out by the employee-driven teams and kept top of mind by the employee-driven teams, but they need also the support of leaders. And there's a really important aspect of that. There's actually this loop that we call the validation feedback loop, which is the other kind of main tactic that can help make something that's common sense become common practice. And so this validation feedback loop is something that leaders can grab the baton for. It's actually what leaders can do. So let's say an employee-driven team brought out a standard and they're keeping a standard alive. Maybe it's related to managing up. Maybe it's a communication standard regarding we're going to position everyone in a positive light. We're going to have ways and tactics for doing that. We know why it's important and what it will do for our culture and our results. And let's say the employee team is really bringing that standard to life and working hard at that. They're going to need help from leaders. And the way leaders can help with that is they can validate that their employees even know what that is. So maybe the employee training team puts on a training about, you know, what is managing up, how do you do it, how, you know, how to make it work in your world. But then the leader needs to grab the baton and, you know, connect back with their employees, maybe at a staff meeting, maybe at a huddle, maybe during employee rounding, and check in with their employees and say, hey, you know, tell me, you know, how you're using this new skill in your work each day. Are you struggling with how to put it into practice? Are you getting some wins with it, etc.? Show me how you're doing it. Give me an example. Maybe watch your employees, see if you can hear them doing this throughout the day in their work. Without that help from leaders, the employees are going to be left alone in these employee-driven teams to try to do this by themselves, and it truly isn't going to become common practice without the help of leaders as well. So this is almost like how the two engines work, and in our model is that you have the employee-driven engine, but then you have the leadership engine. And when you have, this is how we team around here and this is how we lead around here to make these things happen, there's again synergy in that. So leaders need to validate. They need to, you know, own these things with their employees and help them succeed with them and answer that question, what does this mean where we work, in the job I do? And sometimes the leader needs to help them with that. The other thing the leader can do is give them feedback. So they validate, they see how they're doing as individual employees in creating these new habits. And one of the ways that they can help them make that habit is to give them feedback. So based on their observations or, you know, things that they do to validate the tactic or the solution or the habit, then the leader can give the employee feedback. Maybe the feedback is, you know, wow, I heard you trying that. You know, I haven't heard you do that before, and I see that you're now trying it. And giving them that feedback that you noticed, that it matters, that you're even recognize them that they're trying. Even if they haven't mastered it yet, they're trying, and you're giving them feedback on that. So that validate, feedback, so observe, give them feedback. You know, next time you do that, what if you tried this one thing a little differently? You know, are you open to coaching on this? Because, you know, wow, I watched you and I'm so glad you're trying it. Are you open to some coaching of how maybe this could even work better for you? So having those meaningful conversations, those employee-driven teams are a small representative group of the whole. It might be 10 or 12 people that represent hundreds of people to make this new habit. And the only way that's going to happen if leaders for their own employees take on some of this helpfulness by validating and giving feedback to their employees regarding this. So common sense, a lot of the solutions are common sense in our framework. The real struggle to getting to great results is making them common practice, and it takes both the employee efforts, the employee-driven efforts, and the leadership efforts if we're really going to get to common, consistent practice that gets to consistent results that are not just average, but great. We want you to be great. We want healthcare to be great. I think you all know that's kind of our mission in life at Capstone Leadership Solutions, that we want healthcare to be great. And we know this framework is just packed with solutions that lead to greatness, but they only happen if you can bring them alive. And it takes employees, and it takes leaders, and it takes a commitment to that process to make it happen. If you need help with that, there's actually 2 ways that we work long-term with leaders, individual department leaders, through our Nurse Leader Greatness cohort. We have a new cohort forming now. That next group is going to kick off in April. It's not too late to join that. Go on our website and book a call there to talk to us about the Greatness cohort. There is also information there at capstoneleadership.net about the cohort. And this is how we help individual leaders where their organization may not be ready, or maybe their organization is going through this process but they're struggling with it, or they need a little help or want a little help with that. They get that help directly from us on both those employee-driven pieces, but also those leadership pieces over the course of this year. And so that's coming up. That's one way we can help. The other way, of course, is maybe your whole division is ready. Maybe your whole organization isn't ready for this type of transformation. Or maybe it is your entire organization. If you need help with that and you want to explore our partnerships, whether it's a division partnership or an entire organization partnership, again, just go to our website, capstoneleadership.net. Click on that little button there to book a call with us. We're happy to talk about what we do and how we do it, but more importantly, how you're doing, what's going on with you. How is your team performing? What kind of results are you getting? And whether or not we think the framework and its solutions and our approach to change, and in particular transformational change that achieves these amazing results while reconnecting to pride, purpose, and joy. If you think that that's something that your organization or division needs, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to discuss to see whether or not we think that what we do would be helpful to you. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week. I know I'm going to have a great rest of my week here in sunny and warm Arizona. And so hope to see you soon in the next live. I'll be with you next week. Jane will be with you tomorrow with another live, and she has a guest with her. Karen, one of our amazing transformational coaches from Arizona, will be joining up with Jane tomorrow to do the live. So check that out as well. Be safe, guys. Take care.